Okay, everybody ready? Ready?
It's Doug.
Okay, sorry, I won't keep you waiting any longer. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us here today on Treaty 1 territory, the homeland of the Métis. We're here today to talk about the Manitoba Liberal plan to end, I'll just wait for that truck. We're here today to talk about the Manitoba Liberal plan to end wait lists for $10 a day daycare due to shortages of early childhood education workers and available spaces. Getting $10 a day daycare done and done right is a top priority for Manitoba Liberals, because what the PCs have come up with is not $10 a day daycare. It's $10 a day daycare with a big fat asterisk where you have to read the fine print about all the reasons why you can't actually get $10 a day daycare. There are still long wait lists, there are not enough spaces, and there are not enough workers. And look, my wife and I have 4 children. We had huge problems trying to get daycare when our kids were younger. And there's a joke, and it's really not far off the truth, that if you find out that you're expecting a baby, you put them on the wait list for childcare before you even tell your family. But the reality isn't so funny. Honestly, for many Manitoba families, especially in today's tough economy, whether you have childcare or not makes the difference as to whether you can work and whether you can pay your bills. And so $10 a day childcare is not a luxury, it is a lifeline. And as I said, in the meantime, mine was one of the families who struggled to find childcare. We couldn't find it often. If we could, we often couldn't afford it. My wife and I took turns going to work and working at home and looking after our kids. It was not easy. But the reality is we have to remember, I know there are some people pretending this is all some problem that's been created by the PCs. This is a system that was in crisis under the NDP as well. The Manitoba NDP managed to have one of the most costly and least used early childhood education systems. In 2016, when they were removed from office, there were 13,000 to 16,000 people on the wait list for childcare. This is how bad it was. The PC's 2016 platform had Brian Pallister promising to address problems with low wages, staffing shortages, and recruitment under the previous NDP government. Of course, you may not be surprised to find out that Brian Pallister and the PCs did not keep that promise, because in 2019, we as Manitoba Liberals were calling on the PCs to actually increase wages to workers. And we have to be frank and honest about this. In 2020 and in the pandemic, the PCs put the whole ECE sector through hell. We, my colleagues Cindy Lamoureux and John Gerard and I and our staff were getting non-stop calls and emails from ECE centres and workers pleading for help. There were people who owned private centres who could lose their homes. There was no guidance, and then there would be an impossible set of rules. Then there'd be no PPE, and then there'd be old PPE that they couldn't use. Early childhood workers and childcare centres during the pandemic were supposed to be taking care of the children of healthcare workers who could be exposed to COVID before a vaccine was anywhere near ready, for $13 an hour. These are people with 2-year diplomas in early childhood education because they're actually trained in teaching children and in helping to screen them for developmental challenges. And the Minister of the Families at the time that all this crisis played out under the pandemic was Heather Stephenson. One result of this disaster in childcare under the PCs is that there are now an estimated 1,000 fewer early childhood educators in Manitoba today than there were 5 years ago. However, the Government of Canada has partnered with Manitoba to create 23,000 affordable childcare spaces by 2025-26. The money is there, but parents are still facing long wait times due to shortages of workers and spaces. Today, we as Manitoba Liberals are committing to new provincial investments in wages, training and infrastructure to ensure the 23,000 affordable childcare spaces to reduce those wait lists and get kids safe spaces happen. First, we will adopt the recommendations of the Manitoba Child Care Association to increase wages and benefits for early childhood educators and make sure there are standards across the province for wages. We will accelerate the creation of new spaces by improving infrastructure funding from 60% to 100% for charitable nonprofits. And the reason why we're standing here in front of the YMCA is because the YMCA is the single biggest childcare provider in Manitoba and in Canada. And in Manitoba, it is not eligible for full infrastructure funding. Other centres are getting 100% of the infrastructure funding covered. But the single biggest provider of childcare in Manitoba is not eligible for 100% funding. It's only at 60%, and the Y, as a charity, is expected to fundraise the rest. So that's why we were announcing we would go to 100% funding for infrastructure, so that places like the Y can build those spaces. They have spaces that are ready to be developed, especially in the downtown Y, which is looking at a major renovation. This is a huge opportunity that has been completely overlooked by the PCs and the NDP alike. We will also create a single online portal, a wait list, so families only have to register for childcare once. They don't have to register all over the place. And we will, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I can hear, I feel your pain, Robert. And the other really important thing, which I will say, this is a suggestion from Rhonda Nickel, our candidate for Kirkville Park, who's standing next to us. It's really simple. Put childcare spaces where people work. So if nurses need childcare, which they do, we'll put them near hospitals. If teachers need childcare, we'll put them near schools. It's super straightforward and incredibly basic, but this is one of the ways we can actually address labor shortages and start to get people back to work in our healthcare system. If people can't get childcare in today's economy, they cannot work. That's the fact. So making sure that people can get that childcare space they need everywhere across Manitoba is absolutely critical. The other is we want to make sure that, because this is early childhood education and it's part of the education department, that we're also making sure we have French language spaces in place. So we'll expand training programs at the Université de Saint-Boniface to ensure that French language spaces are available and staffed. And finally, we will commit to ensuring that 10-day-a-day childcare is available for all school-age children across the province. Again, when they announced it this spring, in classic PC fashion, they made a huge promise about how great it was, with a big asterisk and a bunch of fine print that then denied most people access. This is not an exaggeration. This is what the PCs do. They make big promises and then they find all sorts of ways to not fulfill that promise and say that you should have known in the first place. Right? So ensuring that actual $10 a day childcare is available for all school-age children means actual 10 days. It doesn't mean $22. It doesn't mean anything else. It means we'll actually be regulating all those spaces. And look, I'll say, when the other parties may blame each other, when it comes to neglecting wages in the ECE sector, you might almost think there was a bit of an NDP-PC coalition going on. The other parties are really giving you something, they're really only giving you something to vote against, and we're giving you something to vote for, which is a real choice and a real change on early learning and childcare in Manitoba. I'll do it in French too. I can do that separately, but if you've got any questions, go right ahead.
Do you want to do French first or questions first?
Oh, well, I'll whip through the French. Okay, so yeah, pour de nombreuses familles manitobaines, en particulier dans le contexte économique actuel, le fait de disposer ou non d'un service de garde d'enfants est déterminant pour pouvoir travailler et payer ses factures. Des services de garderie d'enfants à $10 par jour ne sont pas un luxe, c'est un bouée de sauvetage. Entre-temps, ma famille faisait partie de celles qui avaient du mal à trouver du service de garde d'enfants. Nous ne pouvions pas en trouver, et si nous en trouvions, nous ne pouvions pas nous le permettre. Voici à quel point la situation était mauvaise sous l'NPD. Dans le programme des PC pour 216, Brian Pallister a promis de s'attaquer aux problèmes chroniques liés aux bas salaires, aux pénuries de personnel et aux pratiques de recrutement de vigueur sous le précédent gouvernement néo-démocrate. Aujourd'hui, nous nous engageons à adopter les recommandations de l'Association manitobaine des services de garde d'enfants visant à augmenter les salaires et avantages sociaux des éducateurs de la petite enfance. Nous accélérons la création de nouvelles places en améliorant le financement de l'infrastructure de 60% à 100% pour les organismes caritatifs sans but lucratif comme le YMCA, qui sont les plus grands sources de garderie pour les familles, non seulement au Manitoba, mais au Canada. Nous créerons un portail en ligne unique afin que les familles n'aient qu'à s'inscrire pour des places en crèche dans un point d'accès accessible. Regrouper, merci bien, encore. Oui,
c'est super.
Oui, super. Je sais que, Robert, merci. Ça vaut la peine. Regrouper les espaces où les familles et les parents travaillent Pour les infirmières, les enseignants, nous efforcerons de regrouper les garderies dans ou près des hôpitaux et les cliniques ou les écoles ou à proximité. Et on va aussi élargir les programmes de formation à l'Université du Saint-Boniface pour s'assurer que les places en français sont disponibles et pourvues en personnel. Enfin, Saint-Boniface. Et je pense, oh non, c'est Boniface, ma circonscription, c'est à l'autre côté de la rue. Mais veillez à ce que tous les enfants d'âge scolaire de la province aient accès à des services de garde d'enfants à raison de $10 par jour. Et c'est tout. Merci. I'll take any questions you have.
What is that 1,000 fewer ECEs?
That number actually comes from the Manitoba Child Care Association. Yes.
1,000 fewer compared
To
to 2018.
2018, we've actually seen we've seen 1,000 ECE workers drop out or leave the system, and it's very clear. In 2019, we were approached by students who were working in childcare, who were preparing at Red River, and they said they could not. It was impossible for them to pay their bills just working as an ECE, working full time as an ECE. They couldn't do it. So they were leaving, even though they'd taken a 2-year diploma. They get into their job. They love their job, but they frankly couldn't pay the rent without either burning out or taking on multiple other jobs. So this is a long-standing issue. It was an issue under the NDP. It's an issue under the PCs, and frankly, this is something that the federal government has stepped up with. If you look at the way the money has been spent in Manitoba, it's all federal government funding, which has gone to ECEs. The province has put in virtually nothing while taking the credit for virtually everything. So one of the things we need to do, I think we estimate that there is already a budget for all of this that the federal government has provided. Our total cost for today's announcement would be around $15 million, because some of this is just about spending, actually making sure that people who need the money can get it, which is the difference between the way we run government and the PCs do.
I've been speaking to parents about school-age care, specifically before and after school care. School is starting right away,
Yeah.
and many families are still scrambling to find places. So what would you do to increase care for before and after school?
That's again, it's about one of the major issues. There are two things that are roadblocks. One is to do with schools. One is to do with the number of staff and ECE workers. So if we can increase that number so that we're keeping people in the system so they're not quitting, so we're immediately bumping up those wages. The other thing is making sure that we're investing in those spaces, because we can actually, I'll say the one other thing we could be doing, which we mentioned in our press release, is increasing or making available infrastructure funding for buying existing buildings, buying and retrofitting existing buildings. There were two early childhood education centers in St. Boniface that were worried they were going to lose their spaces because one is operating out of a church, one is operating out of a small school that was going to be up for sale. They could buy the building and it could have 175 spaces. We could easily double the number of spaces we have in St. Boniface. But under current funding rules, you either have to build new or they're not eligible for that funding. So making sure that childcare centers can buy and retrofit existing spaces is critical. The other is making sure we have a proper inventory of space that can be used. It's a shortage of people and it's a shortage of space. We can deal with both. The bigger challenge is the ECEs, but paying them properly and graduating them. If we actually pay them properly, people will want to go into it. That's the big problem, is bringing people back. So that's the fundamental thing that has to be done.
So the infrastructure funding that the Y is only eligible for 60% of their costs if they
Yep.
build the space. Where's that money coming from the province right now?
The 60% is coming from it's a federal provincial fund, right? So it's not really coming from the province at all. It's usually coming from the feds, but it's the province that decides how to spend it. So, yeah, I mean, you have the Y, which is, like I said, more people should know this. The YMCA is the single biggest provider of childcare in Winnipeg. It is the single biggest provider of childcare everywhere across Canada. And here in Manitoba, they've been cut out from infrastructure funding. And they're a charity. They're not private. I mean, they're not private in the sense of being private for profit. So if they want to build spaces, they get 60% from the government, and then they have to go out and try to fundraise for the other 40 when we're really in a childcare crisis. It makes no sense whatsoever. So this is about and we could like I said, if we actually shift to 100% funding, we can start rapidly increasing the number of spaces, because we're not expecting the private sector and charitable donors to pick up the slack for the PCs refusing to do their job.
Would nonprofits qualify rather for the 100% funding, or would that be similar to charity?
It would still be, well, no, it would be, yes, they would also, we'd be expanding the eligibility. It's not just the Y that would benefit from this, but other charities, but other nonprofits would benefit as well.
How long would this take, do you think, to accomplish these goals?
The thing is, I actually think that there's a lot of spaces available. They just need to be developed. And there's a 40% roadblock in making that happen. We should be able to do it. We should be able to significantly increase the number of spaces within 6 months, and we should certainly be able to start retraining and retaining child care workers. I mean, look, you put it in place immediately. I'll say this. This is one thing that's actually incredibly important in the difference between us and the other two parties. The NDP have promised to keep the PC's fiscal plan. That means not only that they're keeping a bunch of PC tax cuts and PC deficits, it means that they're not going to bring in a budget. Their plan is not to bring in a budget. So there will be nothing for over a year from the NDP. So one of the things we're doing is saying if we get elected, we absolutely need to have a budget right now to change course and to start doing things and making sure these things start happening now and not a year from now. So that's the one, and this is something the NDP have committed to, not doing anything for a year. And people should know that. And in many cases, they're promising not to do anything for 8 years. So they're promising not to do anything on homelessness for 8 years. They're promising not to build ERs for 8 years. And who knows what they're actually going to do, because if you actually look at their promises, they're promising not to do anything for a while, which is not much of anything when people are urgently in need of childcare, healthcare, and a roof over their head. The NDP is, I mean, I got to say this, the NDP is promising to do nothing.
So the 23,000 spaces in Manitoba is for children 6 and older, which is not expanding from 6. Do you have a target for children 7 to 12? How many spaces you'd like to see created for school-age children?
No, we don't, because it tends to be a bit easier for 7 to 12. But no, this is right now. We're addressing the massive shortfall for these kids. There do tend to be better programs. You can have there are programs like community programs. Like, this is early learning and childcare. 7 to 12 is not so early.
But those kids still need care, like we're hearing from parents.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. But like, part of this is focusing on what's critical. The 7 to 12, we could be expanding. We'll look at expanding school programs. That's the best place for it to happen, right? Because all those kids should be in school. So if they can have a place at school, that's the best way to make it work.
Schools say they don't have spaces. Pembina Trails doesn't have any room for these programs.
Well, no, that's why we're opening up our infrastructure funding, right? To make sure that this is available as well. And look, I know just in St. Boniface, we're at risk of losing spaces because the province is not stepping up to fund organizations who are having their buildings sold out from under them. So it's all about putting the money in and securing that space. There are all sorts of ways we can be doing it, but the focus right now needs to be on early childhood education. That's where the real crisis is. Okay?
French.
Oh, en français, oui.
Vous allez travailler avec l'USB pour élargir les programmes et tout ça. Est-ce que vous avez discuté de la formation EJE de niveau 3 qui n'est pas disponible à l'USB et qui est nécessaire pour occuper des postes comme celui de directeur?
Oui, alors ça c'est oui, il faut peut-être travailler avec Red River, et parce que Red River fait ça, et de travailler d'avoir une combinaison ou une collaboration entre l'USB et Red River pour assurer qu'on peut le faire. Oui, mais absolument, on devrait avoir la formation en français parce qu'il y a un manque, on sait déjà, de garderie en anglais, mais le manque de garderie en français, c'est encore plus pire. Et alors, oui, absolument, il faut créer ce programme. Alors, ça va peut-être, mais on peut voir si c'est un programme qu'on peut livrer en français assez vite en travaillant avec Red River.
Okay. Et justement, donc il y a un problème pour les espaces en garderie anglophones, aussi francophones. Dans les 23 000 nouveaux espaces que vous voulez créer, est-ce que vous en avez déjà une petite idée de combien concerneraient les francophones ou pas?
Non, on n'a pas un numéro fixe, mais seulement pour assurer que si quelqu'un qui veut un espace de garderie pour leur enfant en français, que ça devrait être là. C'est un service en français au Manitoba, c'est un droit. OK. Merci bien. All right, thank you.
Hey, Dougald.
Yeah.
Good job. I had a bunch of questions about this last night at the doors, so
Okay, good. Okay,
good timing.
good.
Yay!